The rising star. The Mumbai skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Malhotra Technologies' penthouse office. Vikram Malhotra stood with his hands in his pockets, surveying the city below like a king surveying his kingdom. At 47, he had everything he'd ever dreamed of: a billion-rupee company, a mansion in Juhu, luxury cars, and respect from everyone who mattered. Or so he thought. His phone buzzed with congratulatory messages about the latest funding round. Tech magazines wanted interviews. Investment firms courted him. He was the success story everyone cited, the boy from a middle-class family in Pune who'd built an empire from nothing. But Vikram conveniently forgot the nothing part of that story, and more importantly, who had stood beside him through it all. Anjali was in the kitchen when he arrived home that evening, preparing his favorite dal just as she had for the past 23 years. She wore a simple cotton sari, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, reading glasses perched on her nose as she stirred the pot. She looked up with a warm smile when he entered. "How was your day?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Vikram barely glanced at her. "Fine. I have a dinner meeting tonight with some investors." "Don't wait up. It wasn't the first time." These days, he rarely ate her cooking. He preferred restaurants where he could be seen, where photographers might catch him, where his status was reflected in every expensive dish and bottle of wine. Anjali's homemade meals reminded him too much of their early days: the cramped apartment in Dadar, the broken furniture, the nights when dinner was just rice and pickle because that's all they could afford. Back then, Anjali had worked 2 jobs, teaching English at a school during the day and tutoring students in the evening. She'd typed up his business proposals late into the night, encouraged him through every rejection, celebrated every small victory. She'd sold her mother's gold jewelry to help him buy his first server equipment. She'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself, but success has a strange way of rewriting memory. Now, when Vikram looked at Anjali, he didn't see the partner who'd built his dreams alongside him. He saw someone who didn't fit into his new world, someone who preferred quiet evenings at home to glamorous parties, someone who wore traditional clothes instead of designer labels, someone whose English had a regional accent that made him cringe in front of his cosmopolitan friends. The real shift came 3 months ago at a tech conference in Bangalore. Vikram was the keynote speaker, and the event was packed with entrepreneurs, investors, and media personalities. That's where he met Natasha Kapoor. Natasha was everything Vikram thought he wanted. At 32, she was young, stunning, and perpetually camera-ready. Her Instagram following exceeded 2 million. She knew everyone worth knowing and was seen at every party that mattered. She wore confidence like expensive perfume and spoke in polished sentences that sounded like they belonged in lifestyle magazines. She approached him after his speech, her stilettos clicking on the marble floor. "Vikram Malhotra," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've been following your journey. Absolutely inspiring." Her smile was dazzling, practiced, and utterly captivating. They talked for hours that night. Natasha understood his world, or at least she understood the world he wanted to belong to. She spoke about brand building, social capital, and image cultivation. She made him feel not just successful, but sophisticated. She made him feel young again. Within weeks, they were meeting regularly. Coffee dates turned into dinner meetings. Dinner meetings turned into weekend getaways disguised as business trips. Vikram told himself it was just friendship, networking, professional collaboration. But he knew what it really was. He started seeing Anjali through new eyes, critical, judgmental eyes. The way she laughed too loudly at simple jokes. The way she mispronounced certain English words. The way she insisted on touching the feet of elders, a tradition that embarrassed him at corporate gatherings. Everything about her suddenly seemed inadequate, outdated, not enough. At a company anniversary party, the breaking point came. Vikram had invited major clients, investors, and media personalities. Anjali wore her best silk sari, beautiful by any objective measure, but not the designer outfit Vikram had suggested. When she tried to engage one of his foreign investors in conversation, she stumbled over her English, her nervousness showing. Vikram felt a hot flush of shame, not for the investor's potential discomfort, but for himself. He saw Natasha across the room, elegant in her designer dress, laughing easily with a group of influential guests. The contrast was too much to bear. That night, after everyone left, Vikram made his decision. He told himself he deserved better. He'd worked hard, built an empire, and earned the right to live the life he wanted, with someone who matched his current status, not someone who reminded him of his humble past. The conversation was brief and brutal. "I want a divorce," he said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. Anjali's face went pale. Her hands trembled as she set down the cup of tea she'd been holding. "Why?" she whispered, though perhaps she already knew. "We've grown apart. I've changed. My life has changed. You haven't." He didn't mention Natasha. He didn't need to. Tears rolled down Anjali's cheeks, but she didn't beg. She didn't scream. She simply nodded, her dignity intact even as her heart shattered. "If that's what you want," she said quietly. The divorce proceedings were swift and clean. Vikram's lawyers were efficient. Anjali signed everything without contest, asking for only a modest settlement despite being entitled to far more. She wanted nothing that would tie her to this pain any longer than necessary. On the day she left, Anjali packed a single suitcase. She walked through the mansion one last time, touching the walls she'd chosen, the furniture she'd arranged, the plants she'd nurtured. At the door, she paused, looking back at the life she was leaving behind. In her purse, she carried only one photograph, a faded picture of her and Vikram from 20 years ago standing in their first tiny apartment, exhausted but smiling, their whole future ahead of them. That young man in the photo had loved her. She would remember him, not the stranger he'd become. Vikram watched from the window as her taxi pulled away. He felt a momentary pang of something, guilt, perhaps, or doubt. But then his phone buzzed. It was Natasha, asking if he was free for lunch at a new celebrity hotspot. He smiled, pushing away the uncomfortable feeling. He'd made the right choice. He was sure of it. He had no idea how wrong he was. New beginnings and false promises, Vikram's life with Natasha was everything he thought he wanted. Their relationship became Instagram official within weeks of his divorce, generating thousands of likes and comments. Power couple, people called them. Relationship goals. Vikram basked in the attention. Natasha moved into the mansion, transforming it completely. Gone were Anjali's traditional touches, the hand-woven cushions, the family photographs, the simple elegance. In their place came minimalist furniture, abstract art, and a color scheme designed for maximum social media impact. Every corner became a potential photo opportunity. The parties were endless. Vikram found himself surrounded by influencers, celebrities, and people whose names he recognized from gossip columns. Natasha documented everything: their exotic vacations, their designer wardrobes, their carefully curated life. Vikram's social media following exploded. He convinced himself this was happiness, but happiness, he was learning, was expensive. Natasha's lifestyle demanded constant funding. Designer bags, luxury spa treatments, first-class travel, exclusive memberships, the bills were staggering. When Vikram hesitated, she'd pout and remind him of his status. "You're a billionaire, Vikram. Act like it." Meanwhile, across the city in a modest apartment in Bandra, Anjali was building a different kind of life. The divorce settlement, though modest by Vikram's standards, was more money than she'd ever had. But instead of bitterness, she felt something unexpected: freedom. She began volunteering at a community center in Dharavi, teaching women basic computer skills and English. These women reminded her of herself 25 years ago, full of potential but lacking opportunities. She saw their struggles, their dignity, their determination to build better lives for their children. One evening, while helping a young mother fill out a job application, Anjali met Father Thomas, an elderly priest who ran a small medical clinic. "We see 50 patients a day," he told her, exhaustion evident in his voice. "But we have to turn away twice that many. No beds, no equipment, no staff. People die waiting for care they can't afford." That night, Anjali couldn't sleep. She thought about all those faces, the children with treatable illnesses, the elderly suffering needlessly, the families destroyed by medical debt. She thought about the money sitting in her bank account, money that had come from pain but could perhaps create something meaningful. She made a decision. Within months, Anjali had purchased a small building and begun renovations. She called it simply the Wellness Center, a place where treatment would be free for those who couldn't pay. She hired young doctors willing to work for modest salaries in exchange for serving those who needed them most. She equipped it with basic but functional medical equipment. As the center took shape, Anjali felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Every day brought new challenges, but also new reasons to wake up with hope. She wasn't building an empire. She was building something that mattered. Back in Juhu, cracks were forming in Vikram's perfect life. His company had overexpanded, chasing growth at any cost. A major client discovered security flaws in their software and the news went viral. Suddenly, other clients were asking questions, conducting audits, threatening lawsuits. Vikram spent sleepless nights trying to contain the damage, but the problems multiplied. Investors grew nervous. Stock prices tumbled. The media that had celebrated him now scrutinized every decision. His face, once featured in success stories, now appeared in articles about corporate irresponsibility. Natasha noticed the change immediately. "Is it true what they're saying?" she asked one morning, scrolling through her phone. "About the company being in trouble?" "It's just temporary," Vikram assured her, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll recover," but they didn't recover. Within 6 months, Malhotra Technologies was hemorrhaging money. Vikram had to lay off employees, people who had families, mortgages, children in school. Each termination felt like a piece of his soul being carved away. The man who had once felt like a king now felt like a failure. Natasha's patience wore thin. The vacations stopped. The shopping sprees ended. When Vikram couldn't afford her birthday trip to Paris, she threw a tantrum that lasted for days. "I didn't sign up for this," she hissed. "I didn't leave my life to watch you become ordinary." "I built an empire once," Vikram said desperately. "I can do it again. Just give me time." But Natasha wasn't interested in time or loyalty. Those were concepts from a world she didn't understand, Anjali's world. Meanwhile, Anjali's health was declining. The long hours at the center, combined with the stress of managing operations and fundraising, were taking their toll. She'd developed a persistent cough and chest pain, but she ignored it. There was always someone who needed her more. Father Thomas noticed her growing frailty. "You need to see a doctor," he urged. "I'm fine," Anjali insisted, though she wasn't. "There's too much work to do." She'd begun plans for expanding the center, adding more beds, hiring specialists, creating a pharmacy for free medications. She worked late into the nights, sustained by purpose and determination, ignoring the warnings her body was sending. Vikram's collapse came swiftly. A major lawsuit wiped out his remaining liquid assets. The mansion had to be sold to cover debts. His luxury cars were repossessed. The board of directors forced him out of his own company. In less than a year, he'd gone from billionaire to barely solvent. Natasha left on a Tuesday morning. No dramatic scene, no tearful goodbye. She simply packed her designer bags and called a car. "I can't do this anymore," she said flatly. "I need someone stable, someone successful. You're not that person anymore." Vikram watched her leave, feeling hollower than he'd ever felt. He thought about Anjali, about how she'd left with just one suitcase, asking for nothing. The contrast was devastating. Alone in a rented apartment that cost more than his first home with Anjali, but felt infinitely emptier, Vikram finally understood what he'd lost. But understanding came too late. The monsoon rains came early that year, and Vikram watched them from his small apartment window with a hollow feeling in his chest. The view wasn't of the Mumbai skyline anymore. Just a narrow alley where stray dogs sought shelter and garbage accumulated in corners. This was his world now. His days had become a monotonous cycle of job applications, rejected pitches, and growing debt. The tech world that had once celebrated him now avoided him. Former friends stopped returning calls. Investors who'd courted him acted as if they'd never met. Success had brought him thousands of acquaintances. Failure revealed he had no true friends. The stress manifested physically. Vikram developed insomnia, lying awake at 3 in the morning, replaying every decision that had led him here. He'd stopped eating properly, sometimes forgetting meals entirely, other times surviving on cheap street food. His clothes hung loosely on his shrinking frame. The mirror showed a man aged beyond his years, eyes haunted by regret. He thought about Anjali constantly now. In his worst moments, he'd search for her online, hoping to find some trace of her life. But Anjali had never been one for social media. She'd disappeared into her quiet existence, leaving no digital footprint for him to follow. One night, curiosity overwhelming him, Vikram took a taxi to their old neighborhood, the place where they'd first lived together when they were young and poor and in love. He stood outside the building, looking up at the window of their former apartment. A light was on. A family lived there now, their laughter floating down to the street. He remembered how Anjali used to wait by that window, watching for him to return from job interviews. How she'd run down to greet him, hope in her eyes, refusing to let him see her disappointment when the news was bad. How she'd hold his hand and say, "Tomorrow will be better. I believe in you." Who believed in him now? No one, not even himself. Across the city, Anjali's cough had worsened. She'd finally seen a doctor, and the diagnosis was grim. Advanced heart disease, likely stress-induced, complicated by years of overwork and neglect. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent months helping others access medical care while ignoring her own failing health. "You need surgery," the cardiologist told her gently. "And rest. Significant rest." "How long do I have?" Anjali asked, her voice steady. "With surgery and lifestyle changes, several years. Without it—" The doctor trailed off, but the implication was clear. Anjali thought about the center, about the expansion plans, about all the people who depended on the services they provided. She thought about the surgery costs, which would drain funds meant for equipment and medications for hundreds of patients. The choice wasn't difficult. It had never been in her nature to put herself first. She threw herself into finalizing the expansion with renewed urgency. She trained additional staff, established protocols, secured supply chains. She was building something that would outlast her, something that would continue helping people long after she was gone. Father Thomas watched her with growing concern. "You're killing yourself," he said bluntly one evening. "I'm living," Anjali corrected, a sad smile on her lips. "Perhaps for the first time in years, I'm truly living. I'm doing something that matters." She began documenting everything, not for recognition, but to ensure continuity. She recorded video instructions for staff, wrote detailed manuals, established an endowment using the remainder of her settlement money. She was, without quite admitting it, preparing for her absence. Meanwhile, Vikram's health deteriorated. The stress, poor diet, and constant anxiety were destroying him from the inside. He'd wake up with chest pains but couldn't afford proper medical care. The free government clinics had waiting lists months long. Private hospitals required deposits he couldn't pay. He'd applied for a job at a small startup, a position far below his former status. They rejected him. Overqualified, they said, though both sides knew the real reason. His reputation was toxic. The man who'd once made headlines for his success now couldn't escape the headlines about his failure. One afternoon, at his lowest point, Vikram stood on his small balcony, looking down at the street 4 floors below. It would be so easy, he thought. One moment of courage and all the pain would end. All the regret, the shame, the unbearable weight of his mistakes, gone. His phone rang, startling him. It was a creditor, the 5th call that day. He didn't answer. Instead, he thought about Anjali again, about her quiet strength, her grace even in the face of his cruelty. She hadn't given up. She'd rebuilt. If she could do that after losing everything, couldn't he at least try? He stepped back from the edge. That night, Anjali's heart finally gave out. She'd been working late at the center, reviewing grant applications when she collapsed. Father Thomas found her on the office floor, papers scattered around her, a peaceful expression on her face. She died in the ambulance. Holding Father Thomas's hand, her last words a whisper, "Take care of them." All of them. The funeral was small but deeply felt. Patients she'd helped, staff she'd trained, families she'd supported, they came in hundreds. Not wealthy or influential people, but ordinary people whose lives she'd touched. They told stories of her kindness, her generosity, her unwavering commitment to helping those society had forgotten. Vikram knew nothing of this. He was in his apartment, surviving another day, unaware that the only person who'd ever truly loved him was gone. The hospital Vikram's chest pain came suddenly, like a vice crushing his heart. He was walking to a nearby shop when the world tilted and he collapsed on the sidewalk. Faces swam above him, voices called out, hands reached for him. Then darkness. He woke in a bed with crisp white sheets, medical equipment beeping softly nearby. The room was clean but simple. This wasn't a luxury hospital. Through his blurred vision, he saw a nurse checking his monitors. "Where am I?" he managed to croak. "The Anjali Malhotra Memorial Wellness Center," she said with a kind smile. "You had a heart attack. We've stabilized you, but you'll need to stay for observation." The name hit him like a physical blow. Anjali. His Anjali. But memorial meant... "I can't pay," he said weakly, panic rising. "I don't have insurance. I don't have... That's why you're here," the nurse interrupted gently. "This center provides free care to those who can't afford it." That was Mrs. Malhotra's mission. Was. Past tense. The confirmation of what he'd feared. When the nurse left, Vikram forced himself to sit up, ignoring the protest from his aching body. He looked around the room properly for the first time. It was simple but well-equipped, clearly designed for function over appearance. On the wall opposite his bed hung a large photograph. His breath caught. It was their wedding photo. Him and Anjali, 23 years younger, standing in his parents' small living room. Anjali wore a red sari, jasmine flowers in her hair, her smile radiant with hope and love. He wore a borrowed suit, his hand clasping hers, his expression one of pure joy and gratitude. He'd forgotten this photo existed. But Anjali had kept it, treasured it, and made it the centerpiece of her legacy. Tears streamed down his face. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room. Over the next few days, as Vikram recovered, he learned the full story. Nurses and volunteers shared it willingly, proud of the center's founder. Anjali had used her divorce settlement to create this place. She'd worked tirelessly for 2 years, personally overseeing every detail, treating patients when they were short-staffed, comforting families in their worst moments. She had a heart condition, Father Thomas told him during a visit, not knowing who Vikram was. She knew she needed surgery, but she chose to spend the money on the center instead. She said one life wasn't worth more than hundreds. "She died?" Vikram asked, though he already knew the answer. 2 years ago, quietly as she lived. But her legacy? Father Thomas gestured around them. "This center treats over 200 patients daily now. We've expanded to include a children's wing, a pharmacy, even a small surgical unit. All free for those who can't pay. She saved more lives through this place than any surgeon ever could." After Father Thomas left, Vikram lay in his bed staring at the photograph. The young man in that picture had promised to love and cherish the woman beside him. He'd promised to stand by her through everything. He'd broken every promise, and she'd still saved his life. A young doctor entered to check on him. Dr. Priya, barely 30, with kind eyes and capable hands. "You're recovering well," she said, reviewing his chart. "Your heart is stronger than we initially thought. You'll need lifestyle changes and medication, but you should be fine." "Why do you work here?" Vikram asked suddenly. "You could make much more at a private hospital," Dr. Priya smiled. "Mrs. Malhotra recruited me personally. She asked me a question I couldn't answer. Who will care for those who can't pay? Who will value human life over profit? She made me realize that some things matter more than money. I've treated children here who would have died otherwise. I've saved lives that society had written off as not worth saving. That's worth more than any salary." After she left, Vikram struggled out of bed and walked to the photograph. He touched Anjali's face in the picture, remembering her smile, her laugh, her unwavering support. The woman he'd abandoned as not good enough had been better than he could ever hope to be. In the hallway, he saw what he'd missed from his bed, a wall covered with photographs and letters. Patients thanking the center, children who'd recovered, families who'd been saved from financial ruin. At the center was a larger photo of Anjali, older than in their wedding picture but still beautiful, her eyes warm and compassionate. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In memory of Anjali Malhotra, who believed every life was worth saving and proved it through her actions. Her love lives on in every person we help." Vikram sank to the floor in the hallway and wept. For Anjali, for himself, for the life they could have had, for the love he'd thrown away. Nurses and patients passed by, giving him space to grieve. In this place, built by compassion, even a stranger's pain was respected. But Vikram wasn't a stranger. He was the man who'd broken the heart of the angel who'd created this sanctuary. And somehow, she'd still saved him. Legacy of Love Vikram stayed at the center for a week, long past his medical need. The staff assumed he was homeless, which wasn't far from the truth. He helped where he could, folding linens, organizing supplies, mopping floors. Small tasks, but they gave him purpose. One morning, Father Thomas found him reorganizing the supply closet. "You don't have to do this," the priest said gently. "You're a patient, not staff." "I need to," Vikram replied. "I need to do something useful. Something that matters." Father Thomas studied him carefully. "You knew her, didn't you?" "Anjali?" Vikram's hand stilled. After a long moment, he nodded. "I was her husband. I'm the reason she was alone. I'm the reason she—" He couldn't finish. "Ah," Father Thomas said softly. I wondered, "You have her eyes, the same sadness in them?" "I left her," Vikram confessed, the words spilling out. "She gave me everything, supported me through years of struggle. And when I finally succeeded, I left her for someone younger, more glamorous. Someone who I thought matched my new status. I was ashamed of her, ashamed of the woman who'd sacrificed everything for me." "She never spoke of you with bitterness," Father Thomas said. "Only once did she mention having been married. She said, 'I loved someone who forgot how to love me back.' But that doesn't make the love I gave him any less real." Vikram closed his eyes against the fresh wave of pain. "How did she forgive me? Did she need to forgive you? Or did she simply choose not to let your choices poison her heart?" Father Thomas put a hand on Vikram's shoulder. "Anjali understood something many people never learn, that we can't control others' actions, only our own responses. She chose compassion over bitterness. That's why this place exists." Over the following months, Vikram became a fixture at the center. He volunteered daily, arriving early and staying late. He used his business skills to streamline operations, improve efficiency, and optimize resource allocation. He helped secure donations from his former industry contacts, the few who still took his calls. He lived simply now, in a small room in a building near the center, surviving on what little money he could earn from consulting work. The contrast to his former life was stark, but for the first time in years, he felt something approaching peace. He began speaking with patients, learning their stories. There was Ramesh, a taxi driver who'd suffered a stroke and couldn't afford treatment anywhere else. There was little Mira, a 6-year-old with a treatable heart condition whose parents made less than 50 rupees a day. There was Kamala, an elderly woman with diabetes who would have gone blind without the free care. Each face reminded Vikram of Anjali's vision, that every life mattered, that human dignity wasn't determined by wealth, that compassion was the highest form of intelligence. One evening, sitting in the quiet of the empty waiting room, Dr. Priya joined him. "You've changed this place," she said. "The new inventory system, the donor outreach, the expansion plans, Anjali would be proud." "I don't deserve her pride," Vikram said. "I destroyed her life. Did you?" Dr. Priya gestured around them. "This is her life, her real life, the one that mattered. You were part of her journey, both the painful parts and perhaps the catalyst for this transformation. She took the hurt you caused and turned it into healing for thousands. That's not destruction. That's alchemy." Vikram thought about this. Perhaps redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing better in the present. Perhaps honoring Anjali meant living the values he'd forgotten: compassion, service, putting others first. A year after his heart attack, the center held a memorial service for Anjali on the anniversary of her death. Hundreds attended. Patients she'd helped, families she'd saved, staff she'd inspired. Vikram stood in the back, anonymous among the crowd, listening to the stories. A young woman spoke about how Anjali had held her hand during a difficult childbirth, staying with her through the night, even though her shift had ended. An old man described how Anjali had personally arranged his tuberculosis treatment, visiting him weekly to ensure he completed the full course. A teenager told how Anjali had encouraged her to finish school and had personally paid her exam fees. Small kindnesses, multiplied across thousands of interactions, had created this tremendous legacy of love. When the ceremony ended, Vikram approached the memorial wall. He placed a hand on Anjali's photograph, the same one that hung in every room of the center. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything. But I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserved." "The man in our wedding photo, before I forgot what mattered?" Father Thomas appeared beside him. "She knows," he said simply. "Wherever she is, she knows." Vikram continued his work at the center year after year. His hair turned gray, his face lined with age and earned wisdom. He trained new volunteers, mentored young doctors, expanded services. He lived modestly, giving everything extra to the center's endowment. He never remarried. In his room hung only one photograph, that same wedding picture, a reminder of the love he'd received and betrayed, and the love that had somehow saved him anyway. Patients sometimes asked about his connection to Mrs. Malhotra. "I knew her," he'd say simply. "She taught me what love really means, not possession or pride, but service and sacrifice." On his 70th birthday, Vikram sat in the center's garden, a peaceful space with jasmine plants that Anjali had personally selected. The scent transported him back decades, to a young woman with flowers in her hair, promising to stand by him forever. She'd kept that promise, even when he hadn't. Her love had survived his betrayal, transcended his cruelty, and ultimately saved not just his life but his soul. The center bore her name, but it carried both their legacies now, her compassion and his redemption. A little girl brought him chai, prepared by the center's kitchen staff. "Thank you, Uncle," she said shyly. She'd been treated here for malnutrition, and now her cheeks were round and healthy. Vikram smiled, thinking of how Anjali would have loved this moment. "No," he said softly. "Thank you. Because every life saved here, every person helped, every act of kindness, they were all Anjali's love made manifest. And by serving that love, Vikram had finally learned what it meant to be worthy of it." The jasmine flowers bloomed around him, their fragrance a benediction, a forgiveness, a love that death itself couldn't diminish. Somewhere, he liked to imagine, Anjali was smiling, not because he'd finally understood, but because she'd known all along that love, true love, always finds a way to redeem.